Now, the UAE's journey to the future begins. Welcome to the Future Innovation Summit.
Good morning, good evening, depends upon what part of the world you're in. If it's Friday, it's the CEO series, where we interview global leaders, entrepreneurs, and key experts in every arena. Today, our guest is Nigel Sillitoe, CEO and founder of Insight Discovery. Nigel manages Insight Discovery, an award winning strategic communication, market intelligence, and personal branding consulting firm based in Dubai. They manage an array of top flight organizations such as BlackRock. Well, you had me at BlackRock, Fidelity, and Zurich. They have been voted best consultancy firm year over year by Global Investor. And with that, I'd like to introduce Nigel Sillitoe. Nigel, how are you?
I'm very well, Ron, and thank you for having me on your show.
I'm so excited to have you here. It's been a while since we met. I mean, since we had lunch, I think it was, or breakfast, whatever, at the Capitol Club. But it was so good to have you here to talk about what you do. And I think branding communication is so important today. So walk us through as to why this is so important. Is it more important post-COVID than it was before? What is the push behind it?
I think it is. It obviously depends on which media the company's focused on, but so many more people are watching television and broadcasters, whether it be Sky News or Sky News Arabia or Bloomberg. People are working often more from home and they have the television on in the background. So for me, broadcast has definitely become more influential, whereas obviously print is dying a slow death, and you see very few people, particularly in the Middle East, reading a newspaper. They're more reliant on Facebook or LinkedIn. So the media landscape has changed dramatically, but communication, particularly from the top leaders, is so important these days because stakeholders, whether they be employees, customers, want to hear from management. And if the management have a charismatic CEO that's not afraid to go on TV or be interviewed, that's great. But if they don't have that skill set, then obviously media training is required. And we're dealing with clients who have both types of CEOs. But I do feel that communication is far more vital. You've got to communicate with all your stakeholders, particularly given what's happening in the world and the fact that so many people are still working from home.
Yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned CEOs, dynamic leaders, because some have it, some don't.
Yeah.
We see so many examples in the business news of CEOs stepping up to the plate, sending out newsletters, talking to people, talking to clients, stakeholders, which can run the gamut. What happens if I don't have that skill to make that type of communication or connect?
Yeah, sure. We would offer media training. We've done it for many companies. And if at the end of the session, we feel that the executive isn't worth putting on TV or radio, then we will happily tell him or her. And it comes as a great relief, to be honest, because there's no point pushing it. If you're not a extrovert and you don't enjoy being interviewed, don't do it. Find someone else who can be your spokesperson. So luckily, most of the clients we have dynamic CEOs that have been on TV or radio so often, it comes naturally. And when we've done pre-recorded videos, they do it in one take, which is quite incredible. Normally, it might take 3 or 4. So I think I've just been lucky. But we do have some clients where the CIO should be the spokesperson because the chief investment officer is the ideal person to go on Bloomberg to talk about what's happening in the market. But sometimes they get cold feet because when there's a lot of volatility, they're worried about what they might say, what the impact might be on their shareholders if they're watching Bloomberg Live. All our clients luckily have a couple of spokespeople that are approved media trained that go on these TV shows on a regular basis. And you know what? That makes my life so much easier.
Yeah, and you know what? It makes their life easier too because the pressure's off. Because everybody's not good at this. When I say good at this, getting up and kind of wowing an audience. I saw a post the other day from a friend of mine, and she showed a picture of her son, who's maybe second, third, fourth grade, and he did a presentation on a sports figure here in U.S. and got up and basically walked through that. And she was talking about how proud she was of him. And I said, media training should be taught in schools, giving a speech, standing in front of an audience, because as you rise, there will be opportunities for you to step up to the plate and do what you've got to do.
Correct. And normally most companies will offer media training, then separately presentation skills training, because they are clearly quite different. And I think one thing that's worth getting across is that if you're on television, let's say you're doing a live show on Bloomberg, CNBC or CNN, whatever it might be, it massages the ego of the person who's being interviewed, clearly. But most importantly, the clip from that interview will be made available within minutes, circulated internally or externally to customers. And the reputation building that can come from a great interview is phenomenal. And it can be measured through something called AVE, which is a advertising term, but you can put a value on it. But I think if you're an employee of a company, and even if you didn't see the interview live, because let's say it's at a strange hour, you were in a country miles away in a different time zone, when you see the recording or you see it on the LinkedIn homepage of the company, just think of the comfort that can come from seeing your leader being interviewed, quite tough questions, by an anchor on one of these broadcasters or on radio. So I think for me, TV and radio is the most powerful way to get the message across, but I'm slightly biased.
And well, I understand that, and those questions are coming and they're just swatting them away. And you said, wow, because I tend to look at that. I said, very cool. And I look at some of them and I said, wow, this person really needs some training here because of the way they do it. But one of the key points you mentioned there was interesting to me. If the CEO is not good at that, and at the end of that session, that communication session, you feel that they're not good, you give honest feedback.
Yeah, for sure.
Maybe there's a CIO, maybe there's a CMO, or some C part of that suite. That's kind of strength based. So if that person's strength is that, we can use that. That still does not make me weak, but I'm trying to get the messaging out, and that's the overall arc of that. Is that the correct way to interpret what you just said?
Yeah, I agree. So it doesn't matter really whether it's the CEO, CFO, or CIO, as long as it's a board member and fully understands the business from top to bottom. I think in 80% of the cases, it will be the CEO.
Okay. So we started the CEO series with a written-based kind of approach. We send you questions, and you respond to questions, and then we put them out there, and it was nothing there. And this is when we switched over. This was right at the beginning of COVID, when we switched over to live interview format and kind of built the base of people, doing that. So that sinks back into what you were saying, because it's a new day and no one is sitting there reading through 1,200 words or 1,000 words when we can do a clip and they can sink right into that conversation.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So how do we, when you talk of the Great Resignation and people are leaving organizations, how can a CEO or that C-suite team message an organization who's in flux and maybe we have to make some adjustments? How can we put, I don't want to use the word spin, how can we put a positive light on what we're facing? We're facing a calamity, we're facing disruptions. What would be your advice?
Yeah, sure. With so many people working from home, it's obviously a real challenge for leaders these days. So I think there's got to be more engagement, which can be achieved through some of the traditional methods like 360 studies, employee engagement studies, or I like these pulse studies where it's literally 5 questions. It's done every single month. Then you can track employees' responses. So there's got to be far more engagement, and it's so different these days to when I worked for a British bank in the early 1990s, where the CEO would do a tour of the second floor, which I was working on. You'd get a memo beforehand in a envelope, which you then had to sign and pass on. And you weren't allowed to talk to him unless you were spoken to. You had to have a tidy desk. Luckily, those days behind us. Now, it's not so easy for a CEO to walk around the office and meet everyone, get their views, because obviously half the staff might be working from home or only doing 3 days. So I think online surveys still have a valuable role to play, as long as they're incredibly well written, short, and totally confidential, so that the person can be honest with their views and not worry about being fired if they say something nasty about their line manager. So I think online studies still have a role to play, but they have to be outsourced. And executives need to, maybe adopt outsourcing models even more, because there's more trust if there's an independent company with a reputation for doing these studies, like Mercer, whoever it might be, doing it on behalf of the company.
So I'm hearing a lot of discussions concerning a listening strategy. The organization begins to listen to employees, and that kind of sinks into what you were talking about, is pulse surveys. How do we do that? So can I just put in random questions and send them out? Because you're suggesting that maybe we use a third party to do that, but what if my budget does not allow that? Do I just ask questions, or how do I structure those?
Yeah, you can use one of these. Sorry to interrupt. You can use one of these free online tools like SurveyMonkey, for example. But there are some paid tools which aren't that expensive. You can embed a video from the CEO, a 30-second clip introducing this particular study, why it's so important to air your opinions. But it doesn't have to be just online. You can do virtual focus groups. I love focus groups. I think they're very effective. You can either use them amongst employees or customers or stakeholders. We've done them in the past for various hotel chains in Oman, for example, and they're really fascinating, where you have a group of travel agents one evening with the client observing through a video feed in the room next door. I might have been the moderator, and I had these prepared questions, but sometimes I get a note from the client coming to me saying, oh, could you also ask this question, or ask this person on your left, because they're really intrigued by what this travel agent who's flown in from Belgium might have to say. And then the next evening, it could be employees. So I think focus groups are sometimes forgotten, because while statistically they're not always valid in terms of the numbers of people you can employ, you get such good quantitative data from these sort of studies that is invaluable to management. So I really believe in online studies, as long as they're totally confidential, but also focus groups, 360 studies. So that's all research. So I think research is becoming even more critical these days, being able to analyze the results and then benchmark month by month or quarter by quarter or year by year.
You mentioned something that's very dear to me as focus groups. I learned a long time ago, if you pulse your workforce, and you get advice from them, in other words, you seek their advice. If I'm trying to design for a new policy, who better to ask than the people that's got to adhere to that policy, as opposed to sitting in the smart room with all the big shots and coming up with a policy, and it's tone deaf from that side. So focus group, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I was going to say, but it only works if the results are distributed widely amongst employees. So can you imagine how aggrieved you're going to be if you're sitting in Egypt working for a bank, you participate in the study, and then you hear nothing. You don't get the headline result, and you're not going to therefore do it the next year. So when we've worked with clients, because obviously engagement's all part of communication at the end of the day, we insist that the results, which we will often write, are distributed far and wide, whether it be through a town hall or through a video or whatever it might be. because you've got to, in order to retain clients these days, employees these days, engage with them, ask their opinion, and it doesn't matter what level these employees might be. You're going to learn a lot, whatever grade they might have.
Yeah.
So they've got to walk the talk.
Walk the talk. So if that's the case, and as we talk about the so-called Great Resignation, if I've never listened before, if I've always designed policy in the so-called big room, all the big shots, and you just distribute it, how do I change that? How do I change that approach to say now we want to listen? Or what would you advise a client who's never listened before, but the turnover, people are leaving, and it's just distrust from this side? What's the first step in trying to win back that audience?
Yeah, I think the CEO obviously might need some coaching or mentoring for starters, but
I like the way you said that. May need.
Yeah, mainly. But luckily, we don't have any clients like that, because most of our clients are financial services, and the people working in financial services, I think, in the main, are pretty good listeners, because they've come from an environment where they have to listen to employees or customers. Otherwise, they're dead in the water, because it's a very competitive space, particularly when you look at investment management, for example. But I think all the stuff we talked about earlier will help, because one way to listen is by getting feedback on a regular basis from all your stakeholders. It doesn't matter who they are: investors, employees, customers, regulators. And we did a fascinating project many years back for Abu Dhabi Rail, where we had to interview all their stakeholders because they wanted to listen to them. So we interviewed their customers, their suppliers, their employees, the lawyers. It was a massive task, and then we were able to compare the results between these different stakeholders. And I don't know of many companies who go to that sort of length to find out what their reputation is amongst these different stakeholders. And on the question of reputation, I did a call the other day with a reputation management company, and this is also worth looking at, and it is all part of listening. Because let's say you do a Google search using google.com, not .ae over here, and you put in your business name. It's really fascinating to see which companies are above your website, and also which companies are advertising. And it staggers me that not more companies will do this sort of due diligence on their ranking on Google, because they could find that 5 of their competitors are above their website listing. And also there are 3 rather suspect companies advertising so much money through digital marketing that, again, they've leapfrogged your website listing, and so much traffic is being driven to competitors or companies that you would never want to be closely associated with. So this is where I think reputation management comes in. And one point is to make sure you do some analysis on where you stand.
Competitive analysis. And I find, because a lot of my work is in human resources, and I'll ask these leaders in human resources, what is the competitive analysis of your business? Give me 3 top competitors. And I am actually shocked of the number of people can't give me that. And I'm thinking, you're trying to compete for talent. You're trying to compete. Your EVP is probably not where it should be. The value proposition for someone coming to work for you, and you've never given that a thought. So if I'm doing this search on Google and all these things come up, because you and I were talking earlier before the broadcast started about all the companies that are, you sign with us, 100% success in this realm. And it just goes on. And then when you get down to a reputable company, I may come in 7th or 8th, but all the other companies are offering overnight kind of solutions. How do you filter through that from an organization perspective?
Yeah, I can't really answer that. It's a really complex question, to be honest. We could be talking about it for half an hour, I'm afraid.
Okay. Because the thing is, if I see that and maybe I don't have an understanding of the minutia behind it, select one of those kinds of organizations. So let's take it back for a step. So I have to manage my public profile. That means my footprint on social, which is a whole different world today versus what it was
Yeah.
years ago. Walk us through that transition.
Yeah, sure. Well, the world's changed. So many companies, particularly large companies now, have social media guidelines for the employees. So you have to have a certain background. The company logo has to be, let's say, top left. You have to be wearing a tie, or you could be shirtless. So yeah, there's a lot of restrictions these days on employees in big companies posting, which is no bad thing, because obviously there have to be internal controls. But for people like you and I running SMEs, we can be far more spontaneous and therefore creative. So if you're at an event, you can do some selfies, post them, hashtag the relevant individuals. And hence, I quite enjoy social media. Some people accuse me maybe of posting too often on LinkedIn, which is my favorite, but it's my way of getting my messages across, building my own profile and reputation, and then in turn generating leads. So I don't really advertise, but I find a platform like LinkedIn is so relevant to my business, as long as the quality of the photo is excellent and the written message, and that's where some people go wrong. So I'm shocked by some of the stuff I see on LinkedIn. It's just truly awful.
Yeah. So if LinkedIn is, I call LinkedIn the billboard to the business world. So you have this, but what if I'm not understanding as to how it should be used from a business approach, and I'm just kind of posting, I don't want to say crap, but what, I'm just posting stuff. And I'm posting stuff there, Facebook, Instagram. I'm kind of all over the place. So that's kind of a social media strategy. Should we think of how we devise a strategy to say, here, this is here, and kind of the approach from there?
Yeah, sure. That will be a different approach to strategic communications, which is more about PR, internal communication, external, and then there'll be a separate strategy for digital. So with some clients, we'll do both. And we're managing the LinkedIn accounts. We're actually responsible for taking the images, writing the content, making sure that employees see these posts. There's no point in posting a video of someone who's just been interviewed on Bloomberg if employees don't see it. So we work with the comms team to make sure that the day before the interview, we alert them that XYZ is about to go on Bloomberg. Click on this link to watch it live. And if they haven't seen it live, then obviously they will get a reminder that, hey, please watch this video, like and share. So personal branding is something we're getting more and more inquiries about. And this is really to help executives who may not get the support from their company to actually raise their own profile. So the C-level executives often get the media training, presentation training, but there will be some others who feel a bit left out, but they want to raise their profile, make an impact on social media. So that's where we would come in with personal branding. We'll look at their LinkedIn profile. We'll look at the image they might use above their title. And sometimes they're truly awful and it's very easy to fix. Also the description of what they do, the wording that actually describes them. So it's not rocket science, but I think it's worth tidying up. And then you'll get far more likes and views. And with some of our personal branding clients, we've managed to, increase threefold the number of followers in a very short period, because we're just professionalizing their messages.
Yeah, I love the term professionalizing.
And if I could give one, sorry, Ron, up to you. No, I was going to give you one nice case study, and that is, as you're aware, I was lucky enough to get this golden visa from the UAE government, which is a new initiative. Hopefully you get yours soon. I'm not alone, by the way. There are many, tens of thousands who've been granted this.
You're the only one that I know. Other ones I see, I say, oh, that's cool. Oh my God, a friend of mine.
Okay, and you know what? I was a bit reluctant to post it because I didn't want to seem bragging, particularly what's happening in Ukraine. But what I did was a friend of mine's got a student son who is aspiring photographer. So I got him to come to this future museum. He took about 100 pictures. Luckily, one of them came out quite well. But the focus wasn't on me. It was on this future museum, which is ranked one of the most stunning buildings in the world, a lot of calligraphy. And what's quite incredible is that I do post quite a lot on LinkedIn, but the number of views I've had from this single post is probably more than 20 business posts since January. It's 38,000 views on a LinkedIn post, about 350 likes, and lots of people commenting. Also business inquiries as a result, and lots of people saying, how did you do this? But the reason I mention this is because I've had so many media inquiries from journalists saying, we'd love to do a feature on this to find out how you went about it, or how someone can go about getting a golden visa. So I now get these emails all the time with like 8 questions. So I think this is where communication is so powerful. If you send out a message which resonates with people, it's not too bragging, but there's a great picture that goes with it, that will lead to some other opportunities for me. It's been a lot of media interest. And then once I've been interviewed, obviously I can then post the outcome. So that's a great example of how I think, I was spontaneous, and I was lucky that the image worked and the message was very short and punchy, but not at all braggy. And that's where a lot of people make too many mistakes. They talk about themselves and this award or that award.
Trust me on that one. It's just, I had a friend of mine, and every post he's in the photo and he's talking about his issues. And I'm thinking, look at the overall picture. What are you trying to say? Can we do it that way? It doesn't always have to be about me posting. So I think a lot of times when we think about LinkedIn, is the kind of business space that we use. Strategically, you put that there and it worked out from the other side. I always tend to look at it as going fishing. You put bait on the line and you throw it out there. If it's attractive enough, a fish is going to come by and bite. If it's not, everybody's just going to navigate around and not pay it any attention. But I tend to find sometimes that I'm always amazed when I connected with someone and I go to their profile and it's like reading a tombstone. They'll say work for this company from 2015 to 2020, nothing else. And
they don't talk about the impact they made at that company.
Nothing. And I'm thinking, so why should someone even click on you? Because all you said that I did duty from this time to this time, and then I did duty from this time to this. You didn't show any value. Is that important that we should show value from our post? Which is, you just gave a great case study on that anyway.
Yeah, I think this golden visa one is interesting because there are lots of people who are intrigued by it. They don't know what the process is, and they don't know what the benefits are. And there's a massive cost saving if you are a UAE resident, because you're granted a 10-year visa. You don't have to renew every 2 years and pay X $1,000. And the Abu Dhabi end of the UAE government have introduced all these benefits for golden visas, which hopefully will soon be duplicated by the Dubai government. Our aim in life is really not to promote Nigel Sillitoe, whoever. It's to promote our clients and then position themselves as thought leaders. So that's really one of our core objectives. So if this lady, Monica, who sits in Italy, she's head of global research for one of the biggest asset management companies in the world. We handle her firm's PR. And she was on Bloomberg a while back. She did such an amazing job. We didn't do the media training. She's had plenty of it before. That Bloomberg now have her every single month on their program, which is incredible value for that particular investment management company. So the first appearance you make is so crucial. You've got to have that wow factor, really impress the anchors that you are being interviewed by. And if you leave a good impression, you'll be invited back, which is the biggest success you could ever ask for in my role. And then you're going to get other journalists seeing the interview, because it's very competitive. When Bloomberg are interviewing people, they've got a watchful eye on CNBC, for example, their business program, to see who's appearing on their show. And if they see someone who's really good on their competitor program, obviously they're going to want to interview them. So hence the way you look, the way you position, your background, your opening statement, bridging questions, it's so important.
So you mentioned she didn't have media training, but she had the oomph.
She had, and she's a really good interviewer, and it helps that she's a senior executive within this investment management firm, and a lot of broadcasters want, to be honest, more female executives. They have quotas to meet, like boards. So if there's a executive who happens to be female and a really good speaker and really knowledgeable on the subject, then they are gold dust. They are fantastic. I'm very lucky to have so many female executives who are highly experienced presenters appearing on TV all the time to impart their thoughts.
So if we look at it that way, anytime we get an exposure, whether it's through a post or whether it's through an interview, we should look at it as a long-term kind of growth process, because if we nail it, it can take us to other steps in terms of career.
Yeah, well, in terms of career, both within your company, you'll gain respect. I can give you another example of a client working for a Canadian bank. He was very nervous about doing any TV work. We did the media training. We involved an Arabic speaker because most of the programs he wanted to go onto were Arabic speaking, because he's from Lebanon. And we finally convinced him to go on after like 4 months. He was so successful that he, appeared in 1 month 7 times on different TV programs. But when they did an analysis on who the speakers were within this massive Canadian bank, he was ranked number 5, whereas he'd gone from nowhere to number 5. So now the board in Canada were aware of this gentleman, whereas before he was probably never heard of because he'd never appeared in this media review. So he was, let's say, number 4 or 5, even beating their global economist in terms of the number of broadcast interviews. And now he gets so many job opportunities because his profile has rocketed. And as a result, companies are saying, X, I won't reveal his name, we would love to interview, because they can see that he's a very good communicator, and therefore his stock has increased in value considerably. And he's not a fund manager. He's a senior sales executive, but he's competent to talk about the markets and has the ability to go live on TV, which not everyone is willing to do. So the value of his stock has gone up immediately, incredibly. Internally, he's popular. Externally, he's awash with opportunities.
What I find interesting in that story you told, he didn't want to do this. He was reluctant to do this. So lots of times executives may feel that, I can never do that. I can never focus. I can never be on TV and be interviewed. All these kind of things come into play. Imposter syndrome, all of these kind of psychological tricks that we mentally play. But you do it and realize that, I had no idea. So how do you coach an executive? What's that conversation look like if I'm saying, I don't feel that to me?
Sure. Sure. The guy who does our media training, Tim, he either comes here from London or does it virtually. He looks at the media landscapes, explains what an editor does versus, let's say, a journalist. And journalists are normally at the bottom of the rung, to be honest. They're not well paid, not always loved. So, you've got to really respect journalists. And he will ask the executive to do a pitch. So Tim or I will pretend to be the journalist. They've got about half an hour to prepare a topic. It could be introducing the business or a strategy. We record it all. And we then play it back and give constructive feedback. And we then produce a briefing note to explain where he or she did really well, which areas need to be improved. But also the conclusion might be that you should focus on radio, forget TV, because you're always moving your hands and you're sweating a bit. You're clearly very nervous, whereas on radio that's not going to be notice, and maybe also to rely on online and print, but in a safe way, like asking the journalist to provide questions, and then you can provide the answers, get it signed off by compliance. So I think most people are capable of dealing with the media, but not all media. It's going to be pockets, and it very much depends on, TV, radio, online, print, pre-recorded. But everyone's got it in them, and it can be fun. When you've actually had some media training, and you start off with programs that might not be that well known, you cut your teeth, and then you build up, and then the ultimate in my world will be Bloomberg. But Bloomberg is a completely different kettle of fish, and far more stressful, because there's breaking news all the time. Whereas a safe route would be, let's say, an Arabic program where it's all translated simultaneously. And even if you make a couple of gaffes, you know what? No one's even going to necessarily know. And your boss sitting in XYZ city who doesn't speak Arabic won't even be aware. So you want to start off with some low risk broadcast.
So the young lady who posted the picture of her son doing that, I listened to comments. I said, I speak globally. It doesn't faze me at all. But there was a time. I said, I look at your son at that age doing that. I said, I remember my first time being on the stage. It was a total disaster. But I worked at it, and I wanted to do better. And I got good feedback as I was doing it. And I remember when I first moved to Dubai, I was CEO for Great Place to Work. And I did a TV interview because our PR firm had me situated for that. And my rep said, are you comfortable with doing this? And I'm like, yeah, I've been doing this quite a while. But if I had not been doing this quite a while, and I'm sitting there watching him interviewing somebody else before I got into that seat, I would have been a basket case. So that journey you're talking about, the journey of doing something small, doing something that may not be a visual, and I'm just talking through it, and then gradually working through, if I feel that this is where I want to go. Is that kind of the approach?
No, spot on. And also just preparing, because these broadcasters will send you the questions in advance, normally 24 hours before. They then want some bullet points, so the anchor that can analyze what you might say in response. So you're fully aware of what the questions might be, but also a good PR agency will make sure that the no-go areas are covered, like there are no questions about Ukraine or politics or the ruling family. So the way to end up with a successful interview, particularly on TV, is to make it crystal clear to the guest producer, who ultimately decides on who's being interviewed, as to what the topics are going to be, what the no-go areas are, and hence there should be no misunderstanding whatsoever, and the client is going to have a positive outcome.
Okay, cool. We're going to break for commercial break, and we'll be right back. Just hold on for 1 second.
Sure. Okay. Of course, look forward to it.
Okay.
Do you have an all-star HR team? You may feel your team is already performing at a high level, but let's take a closer look. Would your company's top leaders and employees agree that your HR team are operating at a high level? Are team members able to influence top executives on difficult topics? Are team members' business and strategy focused on the challenges the organization is facing? Does the executive team trust your direct reports as advisors on human capital issues? If you can answer yes to these questions, you have built an outstanding team. If you feel there is room for improvement, Strategy Focus Group can create a custom development program to elevate the quality of your HR team. We use HCI certification programs as well as non-certified HRBP MBA Masterclass to give your team a laser focus on the business and strategy. Please email us at info@strategyfocusedgroup.com.
Welcome back for part 2. Such interesting conversation we had in our first segment. I wanted to follow up because we have a lot of senior leaders across the globe that listen into this program. What advice would you give CEOs or C-suite uh, going forward post-COVID, strategic communication, media training, what kind of advice would you give these people? Because a lot of C-suites are kind of all over the place, and they're kind of in a flux as to how we're going to approach this so-called new world of work or whatever it could be.
Yeah, sure. I think it's realizing you can't be an expert in all areas. So I firmly believe in engaging with mentors. I'm sure you do a lot of mentoring and outsourcing to experts who can help you. So rather than trying to do the SEO yourself or the marketing or the strategic communications, have a beauty parade and find someone who can support you. But I think it only works if you put in KPIs and you have regular meetings. We do calls with all our clients every month to brainstorm. And I think I feel like sometimes we're an extension of that company. We're like an employee, and we work very closely with them. And I think the outsourcing model, which I know a lot of companies do use, is becoming even more important these days. And I'm lucky, to have many external consultants that we work with. Some have been with us for 9 or 10 years. We've got such a stunning relationship. They're just an extension of our team.
I read an article last night on the plane, and it was about a company who, as you go through an interview process, and you may come to 3 people at the end, and you choose one and the other 2. Well, people that went through that process and came down to the final stages, they send each person a personalized kind of communication and let them know that they still want to stay in touch. Would they be willing to share their address so that they can sign them up for future opportunities? Because, we always hear, we'll keep it on file for X amount of time, and nothing to that. And they give everyone a $25 Amazon gift card. And I'm thinking, that's a unique approach. So these are people that went through the process and they didn't make it. So everybody's kind of deflated. I explained to you everything, and I said, by the way, here's a gift card, do whatever. I thought that was just beautiful, the way that they communicated that for that segment of people.
Yeah, I love it. And recruiters over here could learn from that, because we do an annual worst reputation study, and I've been doing it for 4 years. And recruiters once again come out worst out of a survey of about 1,200 people living in the UAE. But it doesn't really surprise me, because they're the perfect example, along with estate agents who normally come second or third when it comes to worst reputation, in not being able to communicate.
Yeah.
So they never or rarely communicate with the candidates who fail to get through in the last round. Yeah. Or you're a candidate and you'd like some feedback, but it's not forthcoming because the recruiter's going to get his fee and he only cares about the winner. So it's interesting when you look at these professions that have the worst reputations, that inevitably the worst communicators, which explains why they got the wooden spoon, but also there is perhaps a strong correlation between the way they are compensated, because sometimes it's commission only, as opposed to salaried. Very strong correlation. And I love doing this worst reputation study, because the results do vary from year to year. Sometimes it's credit card companies, recruiters, estate agents, financial advisors might be ranked, let's say 6 or 7. But the PR opportunities that come out of this study are massive, because, and this is, I think, a good takeaway, to build your profile as a company, you've got to have some data to really interest the journalists. So this is where the research comes in, through a poll, through a detailed market research study. And then you can come up with some hard numbers, like 80% said this. And with our worst reputation study, we rank them, we compare with previous years. And then we try to give some guidance as what this profession that's come out worse could do to improve their reputation. What are the next steps?
Yeah.
And then you get tons of coverage. Tons of coverage.
Yeah. So when I posted that, you always have these people come out of left field, and you're like, what are you? Could you go back and read what I just said? Because someone said, $25 per person. That's a lot of money. How many people do they send it out to? And I'm like, you missed the point. It's an investment. It's not an
Yeah.
expense. It's your value proposition. It's your branding. And it's yeah, well, how many people? Because that can run into a huge amount if you had 100 people and they're going through all the numbers, and that's what they'll never get the concept. And maybe you shouldn't be in recruiting. And that was kind of my way of looking at that.
Yeah, that's a very nice gesture. Yeah.
Yeah. So the book I'm reading now is from there's a group in the U.S. It's a global company. It's Candidate and Experience Awards. Every year they do kind of a Candidate and Experience Awards of the top companies that do cool things to try and keep engaged with companies. And the president is Kevin Grossman is a good friend of mine. He sent me that book when I was away, and I started reading it on the plane. And I could not go to sleep because I was just engrossed in that book. And it was a great book. I forget the name, the title of it now, but it's from the Candidate Experience Award, and it's based in the U.S. It's a global company where they rank these companies each and every year. So what you're saying from your side, it's from the expert in communications, we try and build the brand of of this whole process of great resignation. We're trying to show that we care, empathy, and all those things are tied into that. So is that kind of a message that all of the organizations should understand?
Yeah, they should. They don't always implement it. And
Yeah.
over here, as you well know, the Middle East is very different to where you're sitting in the States. Some companies don't have that trust with employees. They still have to clock in, they still have to clock out. And this is even for some senior executives. They have to be at their desk by a certain time, otherwise their salary is docked X. So there's still some companies over here that are living in the dark ages, but most of the companies we're dealing with financial, so they're in a financial center and they're far more up to date with their employee practices. But there are still certain countries and certain companies which are so way behind and living in the 80s still, and pushing paper, and it's incredible. But it's getting better.
I'm laughing because I got flashbacks on that, because I came over as a C-suite executive 6 years ago for a company that I won't mention, and the person who was getting me processed and everything, he said, "Now we got to go upstairs to do a palm print." I said, "A what?" He said, "A palm print." I said, "What is that?" He said, "You got to palm in every morning." I said, "But for the C-suite," he said, "The CEO, everybody palms in, so you have to count for your time."
Yeah,
I said, this is going to be a challenge. This is going to be a challenge. But I was never able to break them of that punitive mindset that we have to penalize people. If they don't do X, we do Y, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
So final words.
Sure. No, I've really enjoyed this session, and hopefully you can see that I love PR and communications, internal and external. And I think in this new world, we're on the cusp of lots of change. So, you've just got to embrace it and have, I think, innovation at your core. So you keep having to innovate and look at launching new products and adapting your business model, which, we've done over the years, because we largely relied on print and online quite a few years back. Now it's switched very much onto broadcast, and I'm glad we made that move, because TV and radio, and people thought radio was going to be dead, and they keep saying it's dead. But over here, the numbers for listening to the Dubai Business Program keep growing. It's a really entertaining 3-hour show. So it's innovation is obviously key, in my opinion.
Okay, cool. Nigel, thank you so much for being a guest. We really appreciate your thoughts on communication into this new uncharted world that we're moving into, and it's been an absolute pleasure and an honor to have you here. So just hang on for a minute as we begin to close out.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. Thanks for your time.
Okay.